There was a time when asylums were seen as places of healing, quiet sanctuaries built on hills and hidden in forests, where the sick and the fragile could be treated in peace. At least that's what they promised. But as the years went on, the promise gave way to something else. Behind thick stone walls and beneath rusted iron gates, people were locked away. Not always because they were ill, but because they were inconvenient. And in places like these, where the world stopped paying attention, the rules slowly began to rot. Treatments turned into punishments. Isolation became abandonment. And compassion was replaced by silence. Some of these institutions would go on to develop reputations for being haunted. Ghost stories would spread. Tales of footsteps in the dark, screams with no source, and shadows that moved where no person stood. But the true horror of these asylums isn't found in ghost stories. It's found in what actually happened there. Tonight, we step inside two of the most infamous asylums in history, and we listen to what the walls still remember. Tucked away in the hills of Louisville, Kentucky, Waverly Hills Sanatorium looks more like a fortress than a hospital. Tall, looming, and built to be self-contained, it opened its doors in 1910, right in the middle of a tuberculosis epidemic that was sweeping through the country. Back then, tuberculosis had no cure. It spread through families, schools, entire towns, and once you had it, your only hope was to be isolated and wait, either for recovery or for death. Waverly Hills became one of the largest and most well-known TB hospitals in the nation. At its peak, it held over 400 patients, many of them children. The wards were always full, and the air inside was heavy with coughing, moaning, and the slow rattle of beds being wheeled away. Doctors did what they could, but medicine was still in the dark. Treatments were experimental, and some bordered on torture. Lungs were collapsed intentionally, ribs removed to ease breathing, and in some cases, portions of infected lungs were surgically removed. There was no anesthesia for some procedures. Patients endured these surgeries in agony if they survived them at all. And as the death toll climbed, Waverly Hills faced a new problem: how to remove the bodies without upsetting the survivors. So they built a tunnel, a long sloped chute leading from the hospital's back wing to the base of the hill. This became known as the body chute, though its official name was the death tunnel. Bodies were placed on carts and lowered out of sight. One by one, quietly, efficiently. The staff said it was to keep hope alive in the patients who remained. But over time, even hope started to fade. Some say over 60,000 people died within Waverly's walls. Others claim the number is exaggerated, but either way, the building was steeped in death. And when it finally closed in 1961, it didn't rest. Over the years, Waverly Hills developed a reputation as one of the most paranormally active places in the world. Ghost hunters flocked to it. Paranormal teams filmed inside it. And what they found was chilling. Unexplained footsteps echo through empty hallways. Cold spots appear where there should be warmth. Doors slam in abandoned wings and shadows move without light or cause. But perhaps the most disturbing is what happens in room 502. That room sits on the top floor of the sanatorium, and its story begins in the 1920s, when a young nurse was found dead, hanging from the light fixture. She was unmarried and pregnant at a time when both were considered a disgrace. Some believe the shame overwhelmed her. Others whisper that her death wasn't a suicide at all, but a cover-up. A silencing of something someone didn't want known. Visitors to room 502 often describe an oppressive feeling, as though the air itself is thicker there. Some say they've seen a woman by the window, staring out as if waiting for someone who never came. They say she wears an old-style nurse's uniform. That her expression is not angry, but unbearably sad, the kind of sadness that doesn't fade with time. Then there's the spirit known only as Timmy. Timmy, according to legend, was a child who died in the hospital. No one knows exactly who he was. His name doesn't appear on any known records, but his presence is felt by many. Paranormal investigators bring toy balls into the hallway outside his former room. They set them down and wait. And again those balls begin to roll, slowly, then more forcefully, as if a small unseen hand is reaching out from beyond the veil. Some say it's playful, others say it's heartbreaking. Either way, it never stops. Even the body chute has its stories. Visitors who venture into the tunnel report feeling watched. Some hear dragging sounds behind them. Others say they've heard voices, whispering, pleading, asking for help. Waverly Hills isn't just haunted because of death. It's haunted because of how those deaths were handled. Quietly, secretly, without dignity. And that kind of pain lingers 1,000 miles to the northeast, in the hills of Massachusetts, another asylum tells a different, but equally haunting, story. Danvers State Hospital was built in 1878 on a hill once known by the locals as Hawthorne Hill. The location was intentional, isolated far from the cities, hidden from the world. It was designed to be a model of compassionate psychiatric care, built in the shape of a bat with long, symmetrical wings, part of the Kirkbride plan, which emphasized space, light, and structure as part of treatment. But good intentions only last as long as the money does. As decades passed, Danvers fell victim to the same fate as many institutions of its time. Overcrowding, underfunding, and a growing public fear of mental illness led to horrible conditions. By the 1940s, Danvers, which had been built for 500, was housing over 2,000 patients. With staff stretched thin and facilities crumbling, the hospital's mission shifted. Therapy gave way to containment. Treatment was replaced by control. Danvers became one of the first hospitals in the U.S. to perform frontal lobotomies, a procedure that involved driving a metal spike into the brain, severing the connections in the frontal lobe. It was seen as a miracle cure for everything from schizophrenia to anxiety. In reality, it reduced many patients to shells of themselves, vacant, silent, unable to speak or move with intention. Electroshock therapy, forced confinement, chemical sedation, all became routine. And worst of all, many of the people held at Danvers weren't truly mentally ill. Some had epilepsy, others had experienced trauma. Some were just elderly or homeless, or too much of a burden for their families to care for. Once admitted, it was nearly impossible to get out. When Danvers finally closed in 1992, it had already become infamous, not just for its history, but for its presence. Locals spoke of strange sounds echoing through the abandoned halls, lights turning on in empty rooms, unmarked graves behind the hospital. Today, the building is mostly gone. Portions of it were converted into condominiums, luxury apartments where the price of rent does not reflect the weight of the land. But the foundations remain, and so do the tunnels beneath. And for those brave enough to explore them, the feeling is always the same. You're not alone down there. You're being watched, and whatever's with you remembers everything. One group of investigators reported hearing a voice captured on a recorder saying just 3 words. They left us. And in a way, it's true. Haunted places aren't always the result of evil. Sometimes they're born out of sorrow, pain that went unspoken, lives that were overlooked, people who were forgotten. The asylums of the past weren't just buildings. They were reflections of how society chose to deal with what it feared and what it didn't want to see. And maybe that's why they're still so active. Maybe it's not the ghosts who are trapped. Maybe it's us, trapped in the consequences of forgetting them. Waverly Hills, Danvers State, and so many more like them. Their doors may be shut, their windows boarded, their names slowly erased. But the stories remain, and if you listen closely, sometimes they whisper back.